Everything is fueled from me wanting to be a better person on earth.
It's time to do your part.
All right, everybody. I got Rod Oden here. He is a local, just everything. That's what I like to call him. We're going to learn a little bit about him, his story, and you can Google him. He's got a great story. We've been talking for about 20 minutes, and now we're going to really talk. My apologies for doing that to you, Ron, but thank you for being here. Again, we're going to start from the top. How you doing?
I am doing great. I'm glad to be here. My allergies, sinuses, and allergies are bothering me, but you know, if we can get past my nasal sound, I'm here.
We can. I'm glad you said that. So you are here. Why are you here? Why did you decide to come do this?
I am here because of you. Of course, I've watched you grow. I won't say grow up, but mature over the years, and I'm so proud of you and the work that you're doing. So to participate in any way is an honor for me.
Well, I'm honored that you're here, and I think that earlier when we spoke, talking about kind of mentors and people that lead, you've always kind of been that. I don't know if you know that, but I've always looked up to you because of the path that you've paved, and you've done so much in your lifetime, and you do it so effortlessly and with a smile. How do you stay so positive and so happy?
Well, I think part of it is my spiritual base and my outlook on life. I come from a very spiritual family. And I say spiritual. Yes, they were Christians and they went to church, but they were more spiritual than they were religious. And really sought to be at peace and harmony with themselves, with the fellow man, with nature, and with God.
Wow. And that's something that we don't hear a lot of lately, you know, especially with a lot of religions and sects that are just kind of extreme. Yeah. So you talked a bit about ministry yourself, right?
Yes.
You were a minister.
Yes, I have an undergraduate and graduate degree in theology, and I pastored for a number of years.
All right. So tell us a bit about your background. I understand you're from Detroit. Paint us a picture about your upbringing.
Well, my parents moved to Detroit, and at the time it was just my parents and the two kids, my older brother and I. And my older brother and I would spend our family roots, both of my parents are from Alabama. And so my parents are from Alabama, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, and my great-great-grandparents were all from Alabama, with the exception of my great grandparents on my mother's side, because my grandmother was raised by her grandparents who were Africans from the continent of Africa. So they were among the last Africans brought to this country.
Let me ask you something. This is fascinating in its own. Are you able to follow this lineage? Do you know stories about your this? See, this is something that black folks really can't really.
Man, I'm so fortunate. I am so fortunate.
You are.
Because my maternal grandfather was born in 1860.
Your maternal grandfather?
My maternal grandfather was born in 1860.
Gee, wow. Did you ever meet him? Yeah, you were talking about. Oh, wow.
No. This is the other one.
Oh, got it.
But he died in 1967.
He lived to be 107?
170. Now, the thing is, that's how old. Well, they tried to say that he was younger. But he was. And he used to tell a story of what it was like when he was applying for some medical program, and they refused to listen to him when he told them how old he was.
They didn't believe him.
And they didn't believe him. And so the lady who was the oldest registered voter in the county said, yes, he is as old as he says he is. And she says, because when I came to the county, he was a young man preaching. And so she knew him. They still would not give him the number of years that they said. They tried to say that it was 1863, but he stuck with 1860. That's what he told me. And of course, he shared. So I'm second generation from slavery. Now, my grandfather was born during slavery. He was not a slave. He could have been. The only reason that he wasn't is because his grandfather owned the plantation. All right? But it didn't matter. He still could have been a slave.
Yeah, right.
All right?
He just got lucky.
He just got lucky.
Right.
He just got lucky.
And somebody was good to his father as far as slave ownership, etc. Right? Okay, this is fascinating. Go on.
And so, of course, as a kid growing up, I was just fascinated. I just literally sit at his feet and ask questions, and to both of my grandfathers, and they were so patient, which was something that was difficult for my parents because they kept having more and more kids because it ended up being 6 of us, and trying to deal with me was more than enough. And so, they didn't have the patience to deal with. But I guess having raised so many children in both of them and they were older, they just took time.
Yeah, and they knew what they were doing. This is important stuff. Did they talk about the motherland? Did they talk about any roots of Africa? Any stories?
No. I tried to get stories from my grandmother. Now, my grandmother has a very interesting story because she was raised by her grandparents who were Africans from the continent of Africa. Now, they had a daughter who was born in the United States. They were a couple. And it seems like they were a couple when they came to this country, and they still remained together as a couple. But I could not find out any information about if they had other children in Africa before they came to the United States. But they had one child here. Her name was Charity. And Charity worked in Mr. Shepherd's, he was the plantation owner, house. And when she was about 12 years old, he owned everything, so he took her as well. And my grandmother was born as a result of that liaison.
Whoa.
Now, my grandmother grew up on the plantation and played with the kids on the plantation, who were her brothers and sisters, but she did not know that. And she tells the story, which has...
This is what movies are made out of. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And she would tell the story of the fact of all the kids going to school. And she was so excited. She was so excited to go to school. But whenever she would talk to her grandparents about going to school, they would never respond. But it didn't stop her. It didn't quench her thirst for education or her zeal for going to school. And she said she would tell this story and it would just send chills down my spine. And she said she remembers the day that the carriage pulled up to take the kids to school. And she said she was up so early and she kept telling asking her grandmother to comb her hair. And I mean, my grandmother had long hair, so it was, but she was trying to do it herself. And she said, so when she heard the carriage pull up, she said she forgot all about the hair. She just ran out to the carriage and jumped in. And so she could hear the men talking outside of the carriage. And she said they kept saying, nigger this and nigger that. And she didn't really know what was going on. And finally they came and told her she could not go to school, that, niggas don't go to school. And she had never known a difference because
she was treated equally.
Yeah,
by her, right?
By the people on the plantation. Even though she didn't sleep in the house with them, she played with them, but there were no barriers in their play. And the grandparents had to came out and called her. She would not get out of the carriage. It took 3 men to pull her out of a carriage, a 5-year-old girl. And
she was the first Rosa Parks.
So they told her.
Maybe not the first, but think about it.
Yeah, but not the first, I'm sure.
Right, for sure.
And they told her, well, one day we're going to leave the plantation and you'll be able to go to school. And she was a teenager before they left the plantation. And she says she remembers going to school. They had to have a white dress. So her grandmother, made this dress for her. And she said she went to school and she said all the kids were seated and she was older. And she said the teacher called on the children and each one stood up one by one and they had to read from the book. She didn't know how to read. And so when the teacher called on her, she just dropped the book, ran out of the classroom, went home, and never went back. She went to school for one day. But she prayed and she asked God to teach her how to read. And my grandmother could pick up her Bible and literally read and quote verses from Genesis to Revelation. Mm-hmm. And she could transact her own business, banking. She learned to do all of that. Went to school for one day. But she said she says.
But that didn't fracture her. I mean, because I almost feel like from her experience when she was 5, and then when she was that one day she spent in school, that's enough to fracture somebody and scare them from not wanting to.
Exactly.
But it did the opposite effect.
It did the opposite. And she said that she made a decision that day. She said none of her daughters would ever work in a white person's home. And all of her children would get an education. All of my aunts and uncles, including my mom, all finished high school, which for children at that time, people of that age, was exceptional.
Yeah, it was like a college degree.
It was like a college degree.
Yeah.
And none of her daughters ever worked in a white person's home. Well, she had that because of what happened to her mother.
Yeah.
And ironically, all of her father's children died before him.
All of her, say that again?
All of her father's children. Her father, the man who was her biological father, the plantation owner. All of his children preceded him in death.
Gotcha.
And on his deathbed, he sent for her, and she refused to go. She refused to go because he never acknowledged her in life.
Right.
So, she saw no value in him acknowledging her in death. Now,
and he was ready to acknowledge her on his deathbed.
On his deathbed. Now, maybe that would have meant he would have left her stuff, but her ethics, her value system would not allow that to happen. And I admire her for that.
How could you not?
Yeah.
That's all we have as individuals, right? Is our morals and the fundamentals of who we are. This, again, I hate to say the word movie, but this is, right? You agree this is the stuff that movies are made of.
Listen, believe me, there's so much more.
I bet.
There's so much more.
Now, you say there's so much more. I can only imagine. I mean, spending time in Alabama, Detroit, you've lived a full life, so I'm sure. Tell me about the first time you experienced racism, if you can remember that.
Yes, I can, vividly. I was about 5 years old, living on my grandfather's farm in Alabama. Let me describe for you the setting, because we didn't have any electricity in the house, and no indoor plumbing. We had a well on the back porch where we would draw our well, and that's the water that we would use to heat on the stove for bathing, for cooking, and everything else that we needed to do. Okay, the house was lit by kerosene lamp. So I don't know if you've ever been camping and used a kerosene lamp, but if you have used a kerosene lamp indoors, it creates kind of a haze. It's a smoky haze indoors. And that's all the lighting that we had in the house at night. And so it was beautiful yet eerie, and the smell of the kerosene as well. And we sat down, we all sat down to eat. Me and my brother, my cousin Gwen, who was visiting, but her mother was a teacher further out, and so she would she stayed with my grandparents most of the time, and my grandparents. And the house was very orderly. My grandfather would, everything would be set and ready at the table before he would come and sit down. When he sat down, then my grandmother would serve him. After he was served, then we could eat. And
Very orderly.
very orderly. And you didn't deviate from that. And my grandfather, the things that he stood for, you could follow, you could set your clock to. And he usually never stopped eating once he started. And he seemed pensive this evening. And I saw him put down his fork several times. He just kind of like he was listening for something. And then he stood up and he said, "Everyone, get under the table." And me, with my 5-year-old active, hyperactive, and ADHD, I'm like, what's going on? What's going on? And he goes to his room, and when he comes back, he's standing in this doorway with his rifle. Now, my grandfather hunts, but he never hunts. He generally gets up early in the middle of the night and goes hunting. So we rarely ever see him with his rifle. And he says, "Don't." And so I'm talking, and my grandfather comes over to the table. He lifts up the tablecloth, and he looks me dead in my eye and says, "Don't say another word." So he never speaks to me that sternly. So I knew he meant business. But I'm 5 years old. And I'm hyperactive. So that almost went in one ear and out the other. And
You wanted some answers.
and I needed answers. So I turned to my brother. I'm like, what's going on? What's going on? So my cousin, who was younger than I, but spent much more time in Alabama than I did, she leans over to me and says, "It's the Ku Klux, stupid." And I imagine my eyes just got just as big as saucers, because I recently seen, all of this advertisement and stuff about this movie about the 50-foot woman. So I'm imagining everything 50 foot, 50 foot. And I know that the only thing that I know that goes cluck is a
There's a
chicken. So in my 5-year-old mind, I'm imagining this 50-foot chicken. It had to be 50 feet because my grandfather has his rifle for a chicken.
Right.
We never use a rifle for a chicken. You grab a chicken by his neck, flip of the wrist, bam, and he's gone. But a rifle. So my grandfather goes out of the house, and my cousin she's so close to my grandmother, so I pull over very close to my brother. Not, he's just a few years older than me, but that was my security blanket. And it seems like a very long time. It may have only been 10 or 15 minutes. And when we heard my grandfather's footsteps coming up to the porch, my grandmother climbed out from under the table and she ran to him. And she said, "What happened? How many were there? What'd you see?" He says, "Oh, it was about 3 or 4 of them. There was Ku Klux. And I saw them about a quarter mile up the road running to the truck." And of course, when my grandfather came back, I had so many questions. Who are the Ku Klux? And that was the first time in my life that I understood that there were people who wanted to hurt me for something I had no control over, the color of my skin. But my grandfather taught me a very important lifelong lesson, and that is never be afraid of chickens.
Wow. So there's a metaphor in that. That all came full circle, more than a metaphor. You live by that.
I live by that. In life, I've encountered so many challenges, some of them white, some of them circumstantial, but understanding that they're all chickens and that I don't alter my life to avoid them, but I work through them. They're simply challenges, and that I should not be afraid. And that's what my grandfather taught me. So I've learned to utilize those principles in so many ways. As a matter of fact, in 1998, 99, I was running for Congress. As a matter of fact, I was a Democratic nominee for Congress for this district. And I went to San Diego. And of course, I went for San Diego Pride. And normally when I go someplace, wherever we've done, when we come back to council, we report our activities of the week. And so I gave a report, and I said I was in San Diego, and I told them where I went to. And while there, someone set off a tear gas canister and dispersed blocks of people. I saw people running, children, people with strollers and babies and dogs, just eyes burning. And
Terrified.
it just took me back to that early experience that now people are being hurt for just being who they are. They're being targeted. And so, whether it's because of color, whether it's because of sexual orientation, I told that story in council, and I said, I went to Pride not as an official representative of the city, I just went as a member of the LGBT community. And even though I never hid my life or anything, as a matter of fact, at the time I had a partner, and that was my big coming out stories in the papers, on the news, and now and everything they say about me since, the first thing they say is the openly gay, blah 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 blah. But the interesting thing is, they see this. People may never know my sexual orientation, but they see black man. That's what I live with first and primarily. And even during the gay movement, I had to keep, because I worked with the leadership of Equality California, I had to constantly tell them, look, I understand that that's your priority, but it's not for people of color. Our priorities are different, and we can't set that aside.
Is this what got you into politics? Talk about how you landed into politics.
Well, kind of. I had just gone through a divorce, and I was really kind of lost. Not kind of, I was lost after my divorce. Trying to figure out who I am, what am I going to do. And I had been a pastor before, but once you divorce, it was very difficult to continue in ministry. And I had 2 children, and trying to figure out how do I navigate all of these new things. And so my brother says, look, I'm tired of you being depressed. I'm getting you out of here, and we're going to Palm Springs.
What year was this?
This was in, let me see, 88, 89.
So your first time to Palm Springs was in 89?
No, I had been to Palm Springs, passed through it before, but, I didn't really know anything about, didn't know anyone here for sure, and didn't know very much about the city other than everybody was old and everybody was white.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, I'm already depressed. Why are you taking me to Palm Springs? We kind of laughed, but they had some nice clubs, and every day, all I could think of was Palm Springs. And I was getting excited about coming here. Didn't know why, I couldn't explain. So, I've been a runner most of my adult life. And as we were pulling in, we passed the Tramway gas station at that time, which is now our visitor center. At that time, it was painted pink and green and white.
Oh, wow.
Just in complete disrepair. And that was the entrance into our city. But yet, when I passed it, something spoke to me. And I told my brother, pull over, pull over. And I literally jumped out of the car and started running up the hill toward the mountain. And I know my brother was thinking, oh, no, he's lost it. I'm too late. So he pulls over by where that liquor store is, and he parks, and he starts walking up to where I am, because I will get up to a certain point, and I stop. And as he's approaching me, he's using very colorful language.
Uh-oh. Do the math on that one.
But he could tell from my deportment that something wasn't right. And he walks up, puts his hand on my shoulders, and says, "What's wrong?" And I turned to him, tears streaming down my face. And I said, "I'm home. I'm home." And I told him things that would happen in my life as a result of being in Palm Springs. And everything that I told him that day has come to pass.
You got to be kidding me.
So for me, being there, look, there's a word in the Greek. We get our word dynamite from the word dunamis in Greek.
Okay.
But dunamis is written in the active indicative, which means that it's not an explosion, but it's in a constant state of explosion.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happened to me. How did I get started here? I moved here, did not know one person in this area. Went, got a job at College of the Desert part-time and a job at Betty Ford part-time. And I worked those two part-time jobs for the longest. And 4 years later, I was elected to city council.
In 4 short years of living here.
In four short years, a black person in a city where I didn't know anyone and no one knew me.
And a conservative city. Call it what it is.
Oh, believe me, it was a very different city when I started to get involved. People asked me to, I was asked to sit on a Blue Ribbon Committee. And that Blue Ribbon Committee made a recommendation to the city to establish a commission and to write an ordinance to establish the Human Rights Commission. I became the first chairman of that commission.
Wow.
And each year, but they established a commission but gave us no funding. Mm-hmm. And each year we would come back and ask for funding, and they'd tell me no funding. And I remember this particular year, the mayor at that time, so when I raised my hand, he says, "Ron, I know what you're going to say. We don't have any money." And I was like, wait a minute. Did this man just yell at me? Did he just talk to me like I was his child? Mm-hmm. And I could just feel the rage building. And all I could think of, don't say anything, don't open your mouth. This is not the time. Mm-hmm. And so as my anger began to assuage, I said, what can I do with this? Mm-hmm. And it became very clear. I'm asking a policymaker to make a policy change. The only way to make a change from what I wanted was to become a policymaker. Mm-hmm. So I knew at that moment, okay, I'm going to have to run for council. Mm-hmm. And I did. The rest is history.
Wow. I want to take a left turn here because you talked about dynamite and how you kind of literally listed what you wanted and made it happen. For people that are listening, I mean, you make it sound easy. How did you do that? Was it as simple as just saying, okay, here's what I want to do, and then it was just checking it off the list? Or
I think there's nothing more powerful than knowing who you are, mm-hmm. and that you are where you're supposed to be, and that you are doing what you're supposed to do. I think the syncretism of that tripod is the propulsion that will lift anyone and assist them in accomplishing what they are set out to do.
I love it. What are some easy steps we could give people that are listening to be able to hone in on that, to become dynamite? Write stuff down, vision boards.
All of those things.
Saying it out loud, connecting with the universe.
All of those
right?
things.
Repeating it in the mirror every day.
And the thing is, you move in the direction of your focus.
Uh-huh.
So the more you surround yourself and talk about and lift up the things that you want to do, you will be drawn to people who will be able to assist you mm-hmm. in that.
Mm-hmm. And it happens quickly, right?
And you sometimes it does, sometimes it takes time. Mm-hmm. But if you continue that focus, It will. It's like the rising tide raises all ships. It's you will come in contact with people, and it will be purposeful, and you'll know that this person was brought into your life for a reason. And so each one of those things gives you more fuel and more focus.
I love this. We're also focused here in the world, but especially in the States, talking about the 1% or the 2%. Where's the 1 or 2% of people? Why don't we focus on them? People like you who see what they want and they make it happen. They're visionaries who, that are the creative thinkers, people who are actually able to say, okay, this is what I want and get it done. So I respect you for that. I love you for that. I hope that people that are listening and watching find a way to tap into your passions and, you only get one life, right? All right. I don't want to harp too much on your stories as far as what your experience has been with racism, but tell me a little bit more about what it was like working in politics as a black man. You got a lot of pushback. Was it maybe easier for you in comparison?
I don't think it was easier, no. An example, when I was mayor, I decided to let my hair grow out. Just look, one of the things, I get bored, and so I'm constantly changing my look.
You look great today, by the way.
Thank you, but I get tired, so I figure if I get tired, other people must get tired of looking at me. So I cycle things in and out, and when I changed my hair, it was amazing to me. That's all everybody wanted to talk about was my hair.
Not what you're doing, not your plans.
Oh, did you? And people were like, "Oh, whose hair grows that fast? It has to be a wig." They thought it wasn't my hair. I'm like, "Oh my God, this is crazy."
Right. This is a topic.
So eventually, just so that I could talk about some factual, informational, important issues, I cut my hair.
Just to clear that distraction for people.
The distraction.
Yeah.
My hair became a distraction. Look, let me tell you something. I can remember shopping while I was mayor. I was working at home, didn't have time to, normally when I go out, I'm trying to pull myself together. But, I don't always have that luxury. So I had to stop at the store and pick up some things and get them to my daughter and my grandchildren. And I went to the store, and every time I go down an aisle, I could see someone leaning over and peeking and watching me behind each aisle. Now, I'm the mayor of the city. So if they're doing this to me, what must happen to other people of the city who are people of color, and they're not the mayor? So finally, I said to the person, I said, come here, you, the one that keeps following me. Get your manager and bring him to me right now.
Oh, this was an employee.
This was an employee.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So I announced, and I said it loud because I wanted everyone in the store to hear.
Yeah.
So the manager comes, what's wrong? I pull out my wallet, and I said, just flashed a few cards and some cash. I said, I can buy whatever I want in this store. And if this person follows me down one more aisle like a common thief, you're going to have a problem in this store. Do you understand what I'm saying? With the swallowing there. Oh, no. Look, sometimes people think that because you're in a certain position, because of your education or position, that you don't encounter this, you're still black. Now, I didn't have police issues in the city of Palm Springs, but at one point, if I came to Palm Desert, I was going to be stopped.
Just 2 cities over.
Just 2 cities over. But
night and day.
But you also see they have sheriffs. They contract. So these people live all over the county.
Oh, so they don't know you.
So not only do they not know me, all they see is a black man.
Yeah.
And the thing is, sometimes I didn't drive the nicest car. So, I had an old Cadillac. And believe me, it got to a point where I eventually had to go over to the sheriff's department.
And introduce yourself so that they would stop pull you over?
Not introduce myself, but just to make them aware of who I am and what had happened to me consistently in the city.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sir, I don't want an apology. I just want to make you aware that I am aware of what's happening.
You think that changed attitudes with that action?
No.
Not even one?
Maybe one.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe one. You know, we've allowed this system to create an adversarial position between people of color and law enforcement. We need law enforcement, but what is often forgotten is that we employ them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, taxpayers.
We employ them. Mm-hmm. And so if we say we want you to serve us differently, that should be the end of the discussion. Mm-hmm. They should be happy to come to the table and say, okay, what's going on? How can we better serve you?
Yeah.
Rather than these positions of defensiveness. Mm-hmm. Oh, you don't touch us. Mm-hmm. What do you mean we don't touch you? You work for us.
Yeah. And they know that. But that's not the attitude.
Intellectually, they know it.
Right.
Experientially, no.
Mm-hmm. And I believe that they are encouraged by their peers to, this is who you are. Own it. Take command. You're not supposed to be on even playing fields with people. You are a position of power,
This is an unfortunate situation that's happening in our country because we need police officers,
mm-hmm.
period.
Mm-hmm.
We need police enforcement. And there are a lot of good ones. Mm-hmm. The problem is that they have allowed the bad ones to lead the pack. Mm-hmm. And when I say that, even if they're doing more good, they have allowed the others the empowerment mm-hmm. to be the voice or the poster child for who they are.
Yeah. The police chief of Minnesota is a good example. Right?
Now the thing is, unfortunately, that also happens in education.
Yeah.
That they have gone so far to protect teachers, some teachers who are simply incompetent, mm-hmm. that they have gotten to the point where they protect incompetence. Mm-hmm. And that should not be. If it's not a good teacher, let them go.
It defeats the purpose of what you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. And if it's not a good police officer, let them go.
Yeah.
Now, I think we need to get to the point the same as attorneys and doctors. Police officers need to take out personal protective insurance.
Interesting. I haven't heard this. Go on.
Okay. So that if they are not insulated, so that if they do something wrong, if they've been called in 2 or 3 times, then you become uninsurable.
So it's accountability.
It's accountability. Mm-hmm. And that's what we need. Right now, I mean, look, when we look at these things that are happening, and the person's, had 18, 20 different offenses
right.
in 5 years, that person is uninsurable. Mm-hmm. And that's what we need to do. We need to stop protecting incompetence.
And what you're suggesting is a tangible example, and it's not rocket science. It doesn't take an overhaul to make this happen.
Yes. Yeah. Look, when you talk to people, there are lots of things that can be done.
Yeah.
Now, for example, an officer working in a metropolitan area mm-hmm. has a lot of issues that we don't have in this area mm-hmm. in terms of numbers. So when I hear the leadership here respond the same way as the leadership from that area, something's wrong.
Right. Because it's not the same example. It's not the same situation at all.
It's not the same. So if they're responding...
Far from it, if anything.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then it says to me, there's something definitely wrong here.
Mm-hmm. This is interesting, and I'm glad we're talking about this because I don't want. I try not to steer this conversation too much into politics, and we're not talking about politics, but we're talking about things that are incredibly relevant today. One thing, the silver lining with all the George Floyd and a lot of things that are happening is it's again bringing awareness to people. They're saying, okay, now we're starting to see this is a real problem. When they ask us, we're like, this is another day for us. George Floyd happens to it. That's every day, right? Let me ask you this. This is kind of it might be a tough question for you to answer, but I know you will. Then and now, your youth, your teens now, racism, has it changed? Can we have hope? Is there, I mean, what's happening? Because it seemed like there was a lull in the 80s and 90s where people could be racist, but they were still respectful. People were more leaning on the side of being a little more prejudiced and not so vocal. And then now people feel so entitled to just express anger. Is this different?
The phones
Uh-huh.
and these cameras have made a difference.
Yeah.
It's made enough difference seeing it repeatedly that people who thought that this doesn't happen. I've never had a police officer stop me and do this. And so they couldn't wrap their minds around this reality. The one thing that they did, that this thing did, is that it showed not only the officer, but he knew the cameras were rolling.
Looking the camera right in the lens.
Looking right in there, it's like,
Yeah.
What?
Like another day in the job.
Yeah. What do you think is going to happen to me? Nothing's going to happen to me. Because this life does not matter. I'm the one who matters. That's what we live with every day. That's what we've lived with for generations. That's why we have to have the talk with our children about how to respond when you're in those situations. And the fact is, other people simply, since they haven't had those experiences, think they don't exist.
What's the talk? Talk about the talk real quick.
The talk is when you tell your primarily boys, but girls too, that when the police stop you, you're always respectful. You say yes, you say no, or yes sir, or no sir. You look them in the eye. You don't make any sudden movements. If you have to do something, you talk to them before you move. I mean, you go through the whole thing. And yet, even when you do that, you can end up dead. That's the point that people don't understand. You know, no, it's not, and it doesn't matter whether George Floyd was a model citizen.
Right.
See, because people
besides the people. Go ahead.
people want to focus on, the fact
His criminal history.
Right. That has nothing to do with it.
Right.
It's about what's going on and the indifference. Because who was lying down there was me, my brothers, my cousins, my parents, my grandparents. We've all had that knee on our neck. We understand the pain. That's why we can directly identify. That's what they don't understand.
How do we get them to identify? I had a guest on a few weeks ago talking about the talk, right? I remember when my mom sat me down and the same thing you explained, how I need to respond towards police officers. And this gentleman who I discussed this with, his idea was that that would have planted a seed and manifested fear, and that I would have been actually manifesting police to come near me because, you know what I mean? Like he had an opposite idea as to what the direction of the conversation really was. So my point is that A, we all have that talk, B, it's needed, and C, it's to protect us and make us aware, not for us to be scared or to be terrified. It's to create understanding.
To be forewarned is to be forearmed. That's why you give the talk. You give the same talk about sex.
Birds and the bees. That's why I call it the blackbirds and the bees.
Yeah, I mean, all of those things are important. Do you not tell your children the truth in order to protect them?
Yeah.
I don't see that being counterintuitive in any respect.
So let me take you back a step. So as far as growing up, seeing racism, seeing it so vividly, dealing with KKK, and then looking at today, can we have hope?
We always have hope. We always have hope. The what I saw in the protests and the demonstrations was America. Had it only been black people, it would have been a response, but not the same. To see white people carrying signs that say, Black Lives Matter, they get it. They get it. They're saying, obviously, my life matters. But I want to say that these other lives matter as much as mine. It's not saying that Black Lives Matter is better than other. It doesn't even mean opposition to. But it's actually saying inclusively. In order for any lives to matter, black lives must matter. So you see, like people say, well, all lives matter. Who says that? That's like saying all cancers matter. So for the person who has cancer, that's just so rude. You wouldn't say, oh, well, you don't have this kind of cancer, so it's not important. It's important. The fact that all people, well, when they say all lives matter, no one ever said it until we were saying Black Lives Matter.
Right.
So, of course, we know that all lives matter. That's why we're saying that black lives must. And I think people are starting to get it. They really are.
I sure hope so. You know, I saw a post, I've mentioned this a couple of times. A woman basically said, if you have to put a color in front of the word matter, then you're a racist. And I basically tried to explain to her why that was offensive. And her attack was, well, RUBLM. So let's talk about Black Lives Matter, the message, and then the organization. Because I feel like the organization, there's so much politics wrapped around it that it's starting to tatter the message. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Listen, all movements evolve. The same thing that happened with the civil rights movement, but it ultimately got us where we needed to be.
Okay.
So that stuff is just process.
Okay.
That's process. It's
Right.
stuff that needs to happen.
It's part of it. All right.
And it's
People need to hear
evolution.
this.
And it's evolution. I mean, when we look at the civil rights movement and how it started and where it ended up and how it got us to where we are, you know, now the difference today with social media, I mean, this is a whole nother animal.
Yeah.
You know, so while so many things may be positive, you also have this other thing that's going on here. So that it depends on what people are exposing themselves to. That
What they're feeding themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And some of them, I mean, that's where we are in this country right now, unfortunately. I remember when I used to be on Facebook years ago. And I used to get all this stuff, and some of it would seem okay, but then you get to the bottom line, and it's like, all of this was right, but you get to say all of that to say this one little last line, which really discredits everything that was said before. And it was all this conservative crap. And what I've noticed now is that so many people who've been reading that stuff for 10 years, now their process is different because they've been feeding themselves so much misinformation and not following through to see what stuff was real. I'll give you just one little quick example.
Yeah, take your time.
I remember a lady, and she was arguing with me. Well, not arguing with me. She was telling me that she couldn't support Obama because he wanted his own private army. And I'm like, on the surface of this makes no sense. He's the commander-in-chief of all of the military.
Right.
Why would he need a
He has his own.
Exactly. So I looked,
Talk about misinformation.
I
Jeez.
looked into what she was saying. And basically, it was saying that during the time of a draft, we never have enough medical staff. So they want to include drafting medical professionals during a draft.
And that's what's translated to her was his own army from that?
And if you
That's
say
a reach.
if you say it enough times, just like
It still won't be true.
just like if
It'll
you
be true to you.
it's just like testing. Stop, don't say that. Yes.
You know it's true, though, and I think that example speaks to just the day and age we live in now. I miss the days when facts were facts. You didn't have to think about fake news or have to rely on... You knew science. You did the math. You learned this in school. 1 + 1 = 2. You know, you learn chemistry. You learn these things. Common sense.
Just the point that we can say these are alternative facts.
Mm-hmm. Alternative facts. What the hell is the kind of oxymoron nonsense is that?
Begs the question. Alternative. Yeah.
Yeah, this is again, one thing I love about having conversations is obviously we can go so many different directions. And the first thing I think of is kind of how we are viewed by other countries. Because I just feel like there's this dumbing down of America, and we are sliding back so quickly, we can't even keep up with it.
Yes.
So you gave me a good idea, and again, I keep trying to figure out, as far as what it was like in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and how it is today. And I know that's a tough question to answer, so we're going to move on from that. But can you add to that at all? I mean, because I know hope is something you said we should always have, but a lot of people are tapped out. You know what I mean? A lot of black folks are filled with rage, or they're filled with. We always have kind of had these emotions, but despair. Like, what do you think? You're hopeful. Make us feel good. Give us some inspiration.
I'm hopeful because of these young people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, movements throughout history and change comes from the young. They need the proper guidance, instruction, preparation, but the energy has to come from them.
Mm-hmm. Do you worry about your grandkids?
Yes, I do. My grandsons in particular, because of the challenges that black men face. But all of them because of what we face. But I also have hope because they are so intelligent, so articulate, so talented that I tell them frequently, if I had half the talent that you have, I'd have made something out of my life.
Which you already did. Please. You should write a book. Or have you ever considered writing a book?
I have a book, but I just stopped writing. I'm the guy who said, "Oh well, let me see if I can get through. Maybe I'll see if I can get 10 pages." And then I had 10 pages there. I said, "Oh well, let me see if I get 100." Then I had 100, and then let me see. I kept writing. I said, "This thing I knew I was at 300, and I was not at junior high school."
Long story short, your book would be a series, right?
Well, yeah, because I tell so many stories about things like about my grandmother and about my grandfathers, and it's not really as much about me. It's about my life and all the things that contributed to my life. Yeah.
And that's what I think you need to publish that or write it, because you again have had a very unique experience in life. Tell me a bit about your daily practices, and tell me what is next for you. What's the future holding for you?
Well, what the future holds for me is spending as much time with my grandkids as possible. And I'm continuing to teach at Colleges of the Desert and trying to stay abreast and connected as much as possible. Yeah.
Got it. So staying involved, keeping your thumb on the pulse. Got it. Tell me about some of your daily routines. Do you meditate? I know you take walks. You said you're a runner. You obviously eat healthy. What are some things that you do to keep yourself sane daily during all of this COVID nonsense?
Spiritual things, meditation, prayer. See, walking or running for me doing physical activity is where my mind and body are syncretic. So I have to do those things. And when I can't do them as much as I want to, then it affects me, in not the most positive ways. But trying to get through all of this and not to let it inundate, because I need to know what's going on in the world. But I'm hopeful that people can see that the way we're going and the way we've done things for the past few years is not working for us.
Yeah.
And I have always been hopeful in our country until the last election, and it's made me question a lot of things, but I still have to turn back to hope.
And always keep hope. That's the beauty of being a man of color, and is that something that we understand at a young age and identify with that. There's so much beauty to being black, and I love it.
Yeah.
All right, so I'd like to ask guests as we start to wind things down, is there anything that you would like to add? Anything you want to talk about or add, or a message that you'd like listeners to take home?
For the people who don't understand Black Lives Matter, it's about inclusion. And thank God it's not about revenge. If it were about revenge, we'd be in trouble as a nation. See, and one of the things that I love about what I do is that it gives you a window into the future. The demographic makeup of our country is what I was teaching 20 years ago. So when I saw the change coming, and when I saw strong indications of the change, it gave me confidence and hope. But for people who weren't watching, suddenly they were inundated. They pick up the phone, or they go to the place, and the person who is working at the desk or the person who is interviewing them doesn't look like them. Well, the world has changed. And a lot of people simply weren't catching up. And now there were, people who became aware of the change. Look, let me tell you a couple of things. Today, there are more women in college than there are men. Period.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And when I was in school, there were more men in college than women. Over the years, intelligence among men has been feminized. So to be smart is not to be manly. And so in the process, now you have to understand that for blacks and Latinas especially, they are educating themselves out of the marriage market. Because you see, women are socialized to marry for upward mobility. I mean, if a girl brings a guy home, the first thing the father's going to ask him is what?
What does he do?
What do you do? So he's saying, if you want my daughter's hand, you have to be able to take care of her minimally as well as I have, but I would prefer better.
Better, yeah.
All right? So, but if women are getting more education, they're going to what?
Make more money.
They're
Take
going to
more
make
jobs.
more money.
Yeah.
So the fact that, and the disparity is across the board. There are fewer men across the board. But as you look at men of color, black and brown, it becomes harder and harder for them to be, unless we change our whole value system. Now I have students who are dealing with that, who the daughter is in school and he's taking care of the kids, and her parents think he's a bum. And why are you taking care of him? But their marriage is happy.
Right, and it works for them.
And it works for them. But you see, something may work for you, but then you're a part of a family. So it gives me hope, but there are a lot of changes in our society that are going to have to take place. Now, I'll give you an example. What's the number one condiment in this country.
Ketchup.
It used to be.
Oh. Is it salsa?
Salsa.
Get out of town.
Listen. It's been about 8 years ago, salsa overtook ketchup as the number one condiment.
It's telling.
That's huge.
That's telling.
That's huge.
Yeah.
That says how much, not culturally, look, how much our society has changed. The food that we're eating and our vocabulary. How many words that we say now?
Even the word salsa, guacamole. Yeah.
You see, all of these things. And when it comes down to that basic of food, and when we look at, the number one, the top 10 names in America, last names now, are not all
Smith and Johnson.
Exactly.
Right.
See, so people weren't watching these changes. But knowing that this was coming, I applauded these changes. We're becoming, and the thing that's making this country crazy is that in the next few years, better than 50% of this country will be minority. And people are afraid who have been in power for so long, how are they going to treat us? Well, if you've been nice and if people believe in this country, we're going to still work for it and make the same country the great country that it is designed to be.
And that it once was, right? To some degree. I mean, there's always been the flawed system, but to some degree, there seemed like there was some harmony.
Future. I'm looking to the future because it needs to be better. Whatever we had was never good enough. And the thing of whole looking backwards, period. You see, that whole idea of let's do something again was just terrifying.
Silly. Yeah.
Because as a man of color, there's nothing I want to go back to.
That's not helping us. We were never
at all.
Right.
At all.
None of it was ever for us.
There was no period. Look, and see, there's some folks who want to take it back all the way to when we was just happy singing in the fields.
Right. Right.
And picking cotton.
Right. This is good. Let me ask you a couple of questions. You mentioned not talking about the past, and I'm a big proponent of that. It's like we've kind of beat the past up. Obviously, we don't want to repeat the past. We're aware, if you know your history, you put that in your pocket. I like what you're saying about looking into the future. Do you think that nostalgia is dangerous?
Not necessarily dangerous. I think there's a place and a value for looking back. But looking back holistically.
Positively, not negatively.
Yes. There's some things that are good.
Yeah.
But there's some things that they weren't working. So we don't want to go back to that or look back at that or elevate that.
I'm going to continue to ask people that question. That's something that's been on my mind really recently as far as music or sounds or television shows. I've realized a lot of things I like to watch are from the 80s that kind of bring me back to my childhood. But I'm considering that I don't know if that's the best thing because I feel like staying present is the goal and also looking forward a little bit.
Look, the good thing about nostalgia, it reminds us of a time when things were simple and easy.
And safe, right? You felt safe. Yeah.
And safe. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But we have to use that fast forward to create experiences in this time that create those same feelings.
Yeah, that joy.
Yeah.
I
That
love it.
safety,
Yeah.
that security.
Yeah. And that's just where I can see a lot of your spirituality bleeds into this because that's something I've learned as far as from meditating to studying a bit about Buddhism. And it's making sure that you understand joy and creating joy. And if you're not feeling joyful, bring something from your life and place it there.
Yeah.
All right. So my last question for you, you gave us something beautiful as far as what you added, and thank you for that. I always like to ask guests, what are some solutions? What are some things that people can do at home that will be able to open up their eyes, maybe put a mirror in front of them, maybe help them with their own underlying prejudice? And one thing that you said was, using salsa as an example or looking forward to the future and change. What are some solutions that people can do to, make things easier for them and understand the plight of a lot of people of color?
I tell you, my dad taught me to celebrate diversity. There were all kind of people who came to our home. Black people, white people, Asian people, Latinos, and when I look at my family, I see all of that as well. Okay, biracial nieces, nephews. Some are half Mexican, and some are half white. Some are mixed with Asian. I mean, because we were taught to love all people, and we're all beneath this. We're all just people.
Right. I love it. So love on each other, diversify your group,
Well,
meet people of.
and that's the thing, you know. I mean, most people. I mean, if you truly want to, a lot of people say, "Well, yeah, I love everybody." Well, let's see who comes to your home. Do all the people who visit your home look like you?
Right.
When you go to worship, do all the people look like you? When you go to shop, do all the people look like you? Well, then that truly says where your values are. And if it's not, then you need to start reaching outside of that circle and bringing things and people in to broaden your perspective. See, that's one of the things that travel does.
We talk about this often.
You know, I mean, but you have to have a certain amount of money to be able to travel.
And also the want. Can you imagine, though, if everybody traveled and saw what freedom really does not look like? What a third world country really looks like?
What it really looks like.
You know, no offense to the anti-maskers, everyone can do what they want, but talking about I can't breathe, like seeing, you know, people dying on streets, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's so I always tell people, and somebody else mentioned that as well, as far as a solution is concerned, try to travel. You go to Mexico, you hop in the car, you go see something real just down the street.
Look, this country has a lot of things to overcome. It's made a lot of mistakes. But this country is exceptional. It's
Still the best
exceptional.
country in the world.
Still the best country in the world. And we just want to make it better.
Right.
That's all.
And just some harmony. That's all. I love that. We're going to close with that. I'm so grateful for you. I tell a lot of guests that we're going to have them back. We're definitely going to have you back. And I cannot wait to see what the future holds for you. So again, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you all. You know the drill. We'll be catching you next time. Always do your part. Love each other. And we love you. We'll see you soon.